Good evening. We're so glad to welcome you to Trinity Parish in St. Augustine, Florida. We're on our Wednesday night program. We're so fortunate to welcome one of my dearest and longtime friends, Dr. Ron Young. And Ron has written a paper and put together a presentation doing an overview from the book of Genesis as seen through the telescope of the Hubble. And so we're grateful that he and Grace have made the journey down here. And Ron is going to open our eyes, open our hearts, and let us see what it's like through the eyes of science and faith. Ron, we're glad you're here.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Good evening, folks. Glad to be here. Glad to have the opportunity for us to share our evening with you. We're going to spend a little time, as Bob said, looking at religion and science. And what I've titled is God's Path to Knowledge, and that means, what I mean by that is knowledge to understanding the origin and the future of the universe, looking at it through religion and through science. This hopefully is not a lecture, although I realize we're a little limited in your participation because of the media we're using, but hopefully, it's not going to be a boring lecture that you go to sleep, or at least we'll try to wake you up. First, due to a lot of the references that I have used really over about the last 50 years, I have stolen unashamedly, if that's a word, from a lot of very talented people. And I just want to make a point up front that a lot of the slides that you will see do not have the actual reference to sources, because mostly the slides are combinations of almost 50 years of looking. But just want you to understand that the references that I have used in putting this together are available at the end of the slides, but each individual slide, in fact, very few of them, have specific references for that particular point. Our objective tonight is to reconcile some of the major beliefs of the Christian religion with current scientific knowledge and our theories. This is really, to give you an idea of where I'm coming from, this is really a result of over 50 years of my personal look at trying to reconcile within my own feeble brain what I was taught in childhood and through probably the first year of college about religion, and then when I got into the hard sciences, trying to reconcile those differences. I grew up, for probably more than you want to know, but I grew up in a very fundamentalist religious family, and I was taught, as a lot of people were growing up, particularly in the South, that you don't question the minister, you don't question the Bible, and that's the way I grew up, that you would, that you would memorize a Bible verse for any question. And so the emphasis was on knowledge of the Bible. And by the time I got to college, I majored at that time in electrical engineering, physics, and math. And I got into the hard sciences, and I was having a real problem with what I was learning in science and trying to reconcile that with particularly Genesis. So that's when I started trying to figure out, wait a minute, what's going on here? Luckily, in one of the philosophy courses I was taking there in undergraduate school, we were reading a lot of St. Augustine's work, for instance, the Confessions of St. Augustine, and then the City of God. And I hit upon a statement that he made in one of his books, and that was that God has given us two books to read. One is the Bible, which is the inspired scriptures of the leaders, if you will, of the church at that time. But the other is the universe. God created the universe, and he basically said, as St. Augustine said, there are two books, one to read, the Holy Scriptures, the other is nature to observe, and God reveals himself in both of those. And that kind of made it click with me, so I decided, well, okay, I'm going to start looking at that time it was being called cosmology, which is basically the origins and the future of the universe. Well, when I got into it, I found out that to really understand cosmology, you had to understand the big, if you will, and that is the universe, you had to understand the very small. The very small being quantum physics, which is the physics below the atom level, below neutrons, electrons, and protons, quarks, and so forth. Well, in my engineering and physics major, I'd had one basically quantum physics course in my life, because at that time, and this will date myself, there were no textbooks in quantum physics. So the course was taught from research papers of the masters, if you will, at that time. Well, so I've spent about the last 30 years, about all I've read has been quantum physics and religious books of trying to reconcile those two. So what you're going to see tonight is really kind of a result of my intellectual reconciliation and a journey I took trying to reconcile science and religion. And that has been one of faith-seeking understanding. At that point, I knew a lot, but I understood very little. So this journey, if you will, that I've been on was not a pilgrimage in the sense of going to a holy place or whatever. It was more of a holy place within, and that was trying to transfer from my brain to my heart. It was trying to get a heart capable of understanding rather than a brain that could comprehend. And that's kind of where I was coming from. So the statement there on the slide is that I believe that if God created the universe, that we can learn just as well from looking at the universe and studying the universe as we can from studying the Bible. That's not one supplanting the other, it's one complementing the other. And the net result of everything that I'm going to talk about over the next 3 sessions, please understand, has that foremost in mind. I am not trying to contradict anything that's in the Bible or in science, but what I'm trying to share with you is that I think that they agree. The problem, as St. Augustine said, was if there's a difference between those two books, they were both written by the same author, if you will, God. If we think they contradict each other, it's in our understanding of those books, not in what they say. So with that, let's try to go through with these. The approach we're going to take is 3 basically 1-hour sessions. Tonight's session is going to be an introduction and basic concepts in Genesis. Session 2 is going to be a much more in-depth Genesis and science. We'll get into some little nitty-gritty. Don't get scared. It's not a math presentation, but trying to use that to draw some conclusions. The last session is really going to be on the natural laws of the universe and what it would mean if those laws or physical constants and ratios, if you will, were different. So with that, we're going to start with session 1. And again, what I've hinted at is that most of us have spent our life, or at least the folks that I've dealt with, trying to balance reductive science with redemptive religion. And I know in my own world, if you will, that really took several approaches, or can. One is that we tend to compartmentalize religion as one area, science is another, and neither of the two should meet. The other is that we accept one and reject the other. For instance, I don't know how many times I've heard both members of my family and friends over the years say that the only thing they needed to read was the Bible. If it wasn't in the Bible, they didn't need to know it. Well, I simply don't agree with that. Some of the others are that another approach is that we try to reconcile it, but we try to reconcile science and religion with limited knowledge of one or the other, and sometimes both. How many times have you seen religious people, if you will, in terms of speaking, say, well, science and religion are different. One addresses the religious side. The other is pure old science that has no place in religion. I've also had a lot of science people, and I've had the pleasure of working in some pretty bright places in my life, like Bell Labs and others, where I've had scientists say the opposite, that religion has no place in science. Well, I just couldn't buy that, because I felt that somewhere in between, again, as based on what St. Augustine said, that these are both from God, in my opinion, and therefore they're trying to tell us the same thing. St. Augustine, in case you don't know, was the bishop of Hippo, which is in North Africa. He was lived from 354 to 430, but most of his writings are around 400 A.D. And here is his famous quotation, or at least to me it's famous: "Let the Bible be a book for you so that you may hear it. Let the sphere of the world be also a book for you so that you may see it." And again, learning from both of those. There are two means that, in my opinion, God reveals knowledge to us about the universe, about His creation, and about the future of the universe. Again, it's reading the sacred words, the Bible, if you will, and He also gave us the capacity to learn by creating the universe for us to look at, to observe. Again, basically the same thing here, that we can pursue knowledge of Him and the ultimate truths by reading the Bible and by observing nature, i.e. science. These two books have just been written in two different languages, if you will. In fact, one of the names given to God in the Bible is Elohim. I don't know, Bob, if I pronounced that correctly or not, but the basic Hebrew translation of that word is God as made manifest through the forces of nature. God revealing Himself through nature. Thus we can discover the immanence of God, the Creator, if you will, within creation itself by looking at the origins of the universe and science and so forth. I've already said this, I know, but both books were written by the same author, therefore they can't contradict each other, so the problem has to be in our interpretation of one or the other or both. St. Augustine concluded that knowledge gained by faith and knowledge gained by reason are inseparable. They build on each other. He summarized these by two phrases that you've probably seen. I believe so that I may understand, and I understand so that I may believe. And this to me is, I don't know how many times you've heard it, but I have many times, particularly from my father. He would say, when I see it, I will believe it. I think there's some truth to that, but I think also there's a lot of truth in the opposite of that. And that is, I will believe it when I see it, and then the reverse, I will see it when I believe it. And I think both have their merits. I'm going to look at several ways here that I think religion differs from science, and then we're going to look at how they agree, some ways in which they agree, and then talk about each one of them. You know, from philosophy standpoint, theology is based primarily on faith. Science is based on observed facts. The biblical definition of faith, as I'm sure all of you know, is the one in Hebrews, which says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Well, for many years, I had a real problem with the last part of that, trying to understand what is meant by the evidence of things not seen. How can you have evidence when you can't see it? And that's one of the things I struggled with. Dealing with, somewhere in there I was looking to see if science plays any part in this evidence of things not seen. Because science is based on things seen, observations in the real world. I think that science and faith both have to be combined to complete the evidence of God's work. I think that faith influences facts and I think facts influence faith. Combined together, I think that is a better way to get a complete evidence of God. Now, Bob, here's one of the things that you and I talked about several years ago when I first gave this presentation, but I used the term, I think, with you when we were in Egypt, of the concept of quantum theology. Well, the truth is I'd never heard of it, but just in the past few years, in fact, in the last 3 years, there are now 4 major books out, and the area that it's covered in is called quantum theology, which means the application of quantum physics to theology. So I wasn't too far off base when I got into this several years ago. Here is a quote that I'm just going to read to you. Theology has no choice but to submit to quantum theory. But in the very process, it becomes one of the most exciting fields of exploration today. This is written by, I think it's pronounced Omerchu. Anyway, you've got the slide there with his name on it. It's a book that just came out. I finished reading it about a month ago. The title of the book is Quantum Theology, Spiritual Implications of the New Physics. It's an interesting book. It's not a physics book at all, but he obviously has some knowledge of quantum physics, but it's a general discussion of really relationship-oriented physics and religion. In terms of what one of the basic relationships to us is that without science, man cannot know what he is. Without religion, he cannot know why. So I think both of them serve a very definite purpose. We have 2 realms of reality to deal with if we're truly going to understand the world in which we live, and that's both the spiritual and the scientific world or observed facts. The underlying principle of the rest of my presentation is based heavily on this assertion by St. Augustine. As I told you earlier, I was lucky enough to hit that about my sophomore year in undergraduate school, and it really made an imprint on me. And that's when I started this search. Belief without cause is harmful as disbelief without reason. And I think we've seen the evidence of this in a lot of the Jones people and the cults that have to do with brainwashing, if you will, and that's my opinion, of a lot of people who believe it simply because an authority figure tells them to believe it. In my opinion, while my early life was dealt with being spoon-fed answers to questions about religion, frankly, I made much more progress in my journey, if you will, by questioning the answers. And I think I learned a lot more by that than I ever learned in a Sunday school class about when somebody was simply feeding me the answers. Reconciliation requires understanding both views, both religion and science. What we're going to do is examine some of the differences of the 2 approaches, religion and science. We're then going to look at the language of each. In other words, what's the language of science is, of course, mathematics. The language of religion is, of course, whatever language you speak, whether it's English, whatever. We're going to examine the historical evolution of some of these and try to look at, is this just a language problem? Then we're going to look for agreements between the 2. So we're going to spend a good bit of time on this. Reconciliation of these 2, by the way, requires understanding both views. And as I mentioned earlier, that has been a problem, at least in most of the life that I've dealt with. I've dealt with some real scientists, not me, but I had the opportunity to work with a guy that was won the Nobel Prize in physics, Bob Wilson, and we're going to talk about him some. So I've had the opportunity to work around some very, very talented people, way above my pay grade. So we're going to look at the historical evolution of each one of these, and is it just a language problem, or is there some agreement between them? This is just, I threw it out there, a verse from Proverbs. Basically, hear counsel and receive instruction in order that you will become wise. In other words, I think God tells us it's our responsibility to expend the effort to try to gain the knowledge that it takes to understand each of these. Both religion and science, in my opinion, share a common goal. And that's to understand our cosmic origins, our history, and our future. This current mutual antagonism is totally unnecessary. And I've been exposed to a lot of it in the science world that I was in for a while, and then in particularly the academic world. It's nothing but professional provincialism. We're jealous of each other. Both physics and biblical traditions show the book of Genesis and modern cosmology corroborate rather than dispute. And that's what I'm going to try to show here, is some small sample of that. So please understand from the beginning, I'm not trying to disprove either one of them. It's rather the opposite, and that is to show where they are really trying to tell us the same thing. Let's look at some of the conceptual differences between religion and science. Then we'll spend a great deal of time on how they agree. And that's probably going to be most of what tonight is about. Some conceptual differences. Religion looks backward for the truth, and that is the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's kind of where our religious faith is based. Science looks forward to reveal the truth. Both science and religion have the same objective, and that's to discover what is the truth. Religion bases its search for truth within knowledge attained by revelation, i.e. the Scriptures. That's basically the basis of most religious-based searches for the truth. Science seeks the same truth by evaluating interactions observed in the physical world. In other words, by direct observation and facts. Okay, quite different perception or frame of reference to come from, but they both have the same objective. Some other differences. Science usually progresses when a dominant theory is proven false. In other words, science progressed, and we'll talk a little more about these, when Einstein proved that Newton physics or classical physics was simply a special case and was not the totality of physics. So science usually makes significant progress, and that's what the purpose of most experiments and measurements in science are, is to test statements that are put forth as truth. And if you want to make a name for yourself in science, it's to disprove a theorem that has been accepted as true. Religion will usually not survive if its dominant theory is proven false. Think about the resurrection. What would Christianity be? Not any religion, but what would Christianity be if there were no resurrection? So if, unlike science, we make progress when the dominant theme is proven false, not so in religion. Here's a quote from Galileo, which is really the beginning of modern science in 1600, plus or minus a few years. Religion teaches us how to go to heaven. Science teaches us how the heavens go. Science deals with the how, religion deals with the why. Another difference, religion tells us what God is. Science tells us what God is not. And one of the examples I like to quote is exemplified by Michelangelo. He was commissioned by then the brother of the Pope to do a statue that we all know is David, probably rated as the best piece of sculpture ever developed. His sponsor, if you will, when the statue was revealed, was trying to compliment Michelangelo and looked at him and said, "It amazes me how you can do it. How can you take this huge slab of marble and turn it into David?" Michelangelo's reply was supposedly, "It's very simple. I take my chisel and my hammer, and I just chip away everything that doesn't look like David. And I think that's what science does to the truth about religion. I don't know that science will ever tell us what God is, but it certainly, I think, has done a good job in separating some of the false assumptions that this is God. For instance, eclipses. It was thought for thousands of years that an eclipse occurred because God was mad with somebody. Well, in the 1800s, it was proven that they are not only a natural occurrence, but even in the 1800s, they could be predicted down to the 30 seconds of time. They were very predictable, okay? It wasn't, that wasn't God angry with somebody. That's just kind of a weird example. Another big difference is, and this may offend some of you, I hope not, but it's heartfelt, there are no shooting wars over scientific principles. You can't say that about religion. The greatest human atrocities in history were committed in the name of religion, i.e., the Crusades, the Inquisitions, the Holy Wars. By the way, the Muslims didn't invent the term Holy War. The Pope who sponsored the first crusade used that term to justify the Crusades. So we taught them very well. Kind of expect bad people to do bad things. We expect good people to do good things. But the history of civilization has shown that it takes religion to get good people to do bad things. And I think we need to consider that when we are running our life. Religion seeks, here's another difference, religion seeks to make people feel comfortable in their beliefs by answering questions. Science seeks to make people uncomfortable in their beliefs by constantly questioning the answers. That's when science makes progress. The language of the Christian religion, of course, is the Holy Bible, the Old and the New Testaments. This is just kind of to set some information we're going to go through. The Old Testament covers the time period from 1400 to about 400 BC. The New Testament from about 30 AD to about 100 AD. Actually written at about the same time, a little difference in the New Testament. Canonization of those scriptures, if you ever want to get into a long, interesting study, would be to look at how did we come to canonize or officially recognize the scriptures that we now call the Holy Bible. Well, the Jewish scriptures, i.e. the Old Testament, thank you very much, the law and the prophets, the law being the first 5 books of Moses, if you will, and the prophets were canonized or officially accepted in around 500 BC. The writings, which are the Old Testament books between the first 5 books and the prophets, all the series of prophets, was about 70 AD before the Jewish folks canonized, or whatever the term you want to use is, officially accepted them as the language of their religion. The Christian doctrines, on the other hand, canonized the New Testament over a period of a little over 300 years that basically started around 325 and ended around 692. And there were at least 6 major, I think we now call them ecumenical councils. The first one of those was the Council of Nicaea, which I believe was 325 AD. Constantine, if you remember, was Emperor of Rome at that time, had converted to Christianity, and he had officially recognized, he didn't make it the official religion of Rome, but he officially recognized Christianity as an official religion. That stopped the state-sponsored persecution of Christians. It didn't stop all persecution, but it stopped the state-sponsored. Constantine had basically called the Council of Nicaea, the first council, in 325 because he said, hey folks, talking to the Christian leaders, you guys are kind of embarrassing me. I'm paraphrasing this, but you guys are kind of embarrassing me. I converted to Christianity and I made it a recognized religion. And the problem is you don't know what you believe. So he called the council, to the leaders of the church, to Nicaea, and they basically were charged with resolving, if you will, at that time, two major questions. One was the Trinity. The other was the divinity of Christ. While they talked about other things, that was the major topic that came out of that council. The Old Testament, in terms of the Christian scriptures, was not canonized by the Christian fathers until the 1500s. Roughly 1546 A.D., I think, was the final confirmation of them. So it was a period of, 12, 13, 1400 years, somewhere along. The major problem with the Christians canonizing the Old Testament was the concept of the Trinity, the APOCRYPHA, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, the in-between, if you will, words, and the book of Daniel. Daniel was extremely controversial at that time and still is in some circles, particularly the latter half of that. Some of the original book of Daniel is not in the current canonization of the Scriptures. Also, and Grace, you had done this one time in Sunday school, I've forgotten the number, but a large percentage of what's in the book of Revelation is almost word-for-word copy of what was in the original Daniel. And a lot of people don't recognize that, but it really gave the early Christian church a problem in canonizing or officially recognizing those books. This slide is nothing, but it's kind of telling you what the Apocrypha is. Now let me state up front, there are varying definitions of Apocrypha. Some definitions now include all of the scriptures that were not canonized. But what I'm referring to here, which was the problem at Nicaea, was those books that were written in between the last book of the Old Testament and then the first book of the New Testament. And I've got a list of them of what they are. They were, I believe, they're still used in the Catholic Church, or they're not in the Orthodox Church. They still are there. They were in the King James Version of the Bible until, was it 1900s or something to that. Now, let's look at another point. I'm switching topics here. If we look at the different translations that our scriptures have gone through, there is a huge opportunity for lost meanings or changed meanings. Let's go through the Old Testament, if you will, because I want to make a few points. The Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew around 250 B.C. Now, if you remember, it was originally written many years before that. The Septuagint, which was the translation to the Greek, was written or sponsored by King Ptolemy in approximately 250 B.C. If you remember, when the Persian Empire defeated the Babylonian Empire, the Persian emperor freed the Jewish people that were under captivity. They went back, or were allowed to if they wanted to, they were allowed to go back to Israel. When they got there, the problem was most of them had spent 2 to 3 generations speaking Greek. Very few of them could even speak, much less read, Hebrew. So King Ptolemy had the Old Testament translated into Greek. About 100 years before that, by the way, Onkelos, which is one of the people I'll mention later, translated the Old Testament into Aramaic. And if you remember, Aramaic was the language spoken by Jesus. It was a combination, I believe it's right, Bob, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I probably am, but a kind of a combination of Arabic and Greek, I believe, was kind of what it was. Roughly 250 years later, in 390 to 405, St. Jerome translated the Scriptures to Latin. This was the version of Scriptures used by the church, which finally, became the Catholic Church, until 1600, when King James of England split with the Catholic Church, and one of his problems was, number one, a lot of them were the theses posted by Martin Luther, the Reformation that occurred as a result of a lot of that. But King James got fed up, if you will, with the total, as he put it, the total corruption of the leadership of the church. So he broke with the Catholic Church and formed the Church of England, which is kind of basically very much along the Catholic line, if you will, in terms of the service anyway. That's the scripture that has been used since in 1611 or 1600 roughly. The King James Version, lastly in the last 50 years or so, we've had a lot of different translations. The New Testament, again, obviously originally written in Greek, then Aramaic. The Latin Vulgate, again, it was included in the Latin Vulgate that St. Jerome translated, and then King James Version in 1611. Religion and science, now we're going to look at some areas of agreement. I've spent time talking about areas of philosophical disagreements, if you will, or differences. Let's now talk about some of the ways in which they agree. My opinion, both are searching for a different meaning, deeper meaning to life. Both are attempting to explain how we as a human being got here. They're looking for evidence, both of them are, of the creation and or, as in science it's called, the primal force or the Big Bang, if you will. Both of them deal with the origin and the future of the universe, and particularly the role of human beings in that. The Holy Bible is the only holy book of all the religions of the world that is now found to be consistent with what's being learned through quantum physics about some of the major cosmological topics. The creation story in the Bible is the only creation myth that is now found consistent with physics. You remember the original one was, I believe it was called Gilgamesh, I think was the name of it, but it was written long before then. A lot of it is common between the two, but the point is that of all of the holy scriptures of all the religions in the world, the Holy Bible is the only one that is now being found consistent with what we're learning about, specifically about the origins of the universe. Again, just some paid political announcements. The wise man regulates his conduct by the theories of both religion and science. And that's just a quote, a point I wanted to make. Here's one from Einstein I love. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Both are great systems of human thought, each searching for a different and deeper meaning to life. I think, again, to show some complementary roles, here's one of my thoughts. And these are my definitions. Religion is the vision of that which is beyond the knowledge of man. We don't know. It's accepted on faith, and that's the basis of religion. Science is the revelation that gives meaning to the vision. And I think that's how, in my opinion, that's how they fit together. And that's the way I've tried to use it. Religion, again, is based on faith. The science is based on giving meaning to those visions. If you want to look at science in terms of advances in the last few years, science and religion are becoming the odd couple. Scientific advances in the last 20 years, primarily because of the deeper study of quantum physics, have introduced religion into physics at a very fundamental level. Quantum physics is leading us into an Alice in Wonderland world that cuts across the traditional framework of religion. You don't have to be, I'm not trying to get you to be an expert in quantum physics. It's a deeply complicated physics. It is very unnatural. Niels Bohr, who was the father of quantum physics, once made the statement that anyone who says they understand quantum physics does not understand it. It's extremely nonsensical, totally opposite to what common sense would tell you. Physics has advanced to the point where what were formerly topics that were never dealt with in science are now being dealt with seriously in quantum physics. Religion can't afford to ignore the advances in science, and science cannot ignore the basic tenets of religion. And again, I'm talking about the Christian religion, okay? I mean, that's what this is all about. Just as Holy Scriptures evolved through several translations or versions, so has physics. The only reason I'm telling you this is to try to get you to help you understand when we get to some of the deeper stuff in physics. We're not going to have a physics lesson, but to understand that physics itself has gone through three major evolutionary changes. Newtonian or classical physics got us to the moon. Einstein's physics, theory of special relativity and general relativity. Special relativity in 1903, I think, general relativity in 1912, and quantum physics, then to quantum physics. Einstein again proved that Newton's physics was just a special case, that when motion began to approach anything close to the speed of light, classical physics does not hold. The major thing that Einstein did was show the evolution of the concept of space-time. Instead of space being 3 dimensions, there was a fourth, and that's time. So in physics now, you read about the space-time membrane, if you will. And that's because as you approach the speed of light, and you don't have to get close to it, but significantly close, you trade space for time. Space becomes smaller, time is elongated, it becomes longer. And that was the major contribution of the special theory of relativity. Quantum physics, on the other hand, has basically shown that Einstein physics has some problems too. The problem is they can't reconcile the two yet. We've been trying for now over 100 years, about 100 years. They've been trying to... Einstein physics, or theory of relativity, both special and general, holds until you get down to the very, very minute subatomic level. And then current knowledge in quantum physics contradicts Einstein's relativity. A lot of effort in physics, if you want to win a Nobel Prize, discover or put forth, it's called sometimes the theory of everything, or the gut theory, the general unification theory, and that is to unify Einstein's theories with quantum physics. The physics community has not been able to do that yet. All they do know is at the subatomic level, Einstein's physics breaks down. Around the 1930s, and I've talked a little bit about this, strange happenings started happening in physics. Einstein discovered special and general relativity. He didn't discover it, he worked it out by math. By the way, Einstein has never did, he's dead now obviously, never did an experiment in his life. He reasoned through mathematics. He is the only scientist whose theories, once we have developed the capacity to measure or verify, have been shown to be 100% correct. They've never found an error in it. Quantum physics is so new, as I said before, just in my lifetime, and I know that's a long time for some of you. There were no textbooks in quantum physics. There are textbooks now. It's an extremely complicated math, particularly. For instance, most of us are used to thinking in 3 dimensions, the Cartesian coordinate, x, y, and z axis. Well, in quantum physics, at a minimum, you've got to deal in 9 dimensions at the same time. If you're dealing with string theory, which is right below that, it's 12 dimensions. Now, if you want to get your brain torqued over, try to visualize 9 dimensions and do math in 9 dimensions. We had to do it in electrical engineering. It wasn't easy. The mathematics becomes extremely complicated. Einstein's 2 theories of relativity gave rise to 2 things. In physics, it's called the singularity. In the Bible, it's called creation. Okay? It's from whence came nothing. Okay? And then the second was the space-time concept, which we're going to get into, not in terms of physical, delving into physics and math, but that's what helped me understand Genesis 1 and 2. When you're looking at the time of the cosmos versus the time of creation in terms of earth time. And it's only because, to do it, you have to understand Einstein's theory of general relativity, to understand space-time. So quantum physics has exploded with scientific explanations that closely parallel biblical accounts. And what I'm talking about is in the formation of the universe. And I know I've said earlier what, to my surprise and dismay, is when I got into cosmology in its early stages, just trying to understand what it was. I thought I wanted to figure out how the universe came about. I found out in a hurry I couldn't understand that unless I understood quantum physics. So again, to understand the very large, you have to understand the very small. And that's kind of a dichotomy that's kind of hard to deal with at times. Physics and mathematics comprise the language of the natural laws of the universe. Now later, I think it's the last session, we're going to deal with the 6 natural laws of the universe. Science has no idea why they are what they are, okay? But we know what they are. And Bob, I think I gave you a copy of the book several years ago, Just 6 Numbers. That's the physics of those 6 natural laws. It's the mathematics of it. I know you read it and you quote it all the time. It's not a book you're going to sit down and read. It'll blow your friggin' mind. It's not going to work. We want to know, what does physics and mathematics say about important issues previously I can't even talk tonight. My tongue gets on my eye tooth and I can't see what I'm saying, I guess. But it's relegated to religion. Before quantum physics, it was this: religion deals with this, science deals with this, neither the two will meet. It's not true anymore, particularly when you get to the creation of the universe. And that's what we're going to spend some time on one of the later lectures. To understand the language of both religion and science, let's meet the supreme linguist. True master of the universe, God, the PhD not meaning post-hole digger, but divine physicist, okay? God understood, but he tried to talk to us through physics and through words in a language we were capable of understanding. I'm going to deal with, in the next session, a lot of creation, particularly Genesis 1 and 2, and I'm going to deal with a day-by-day comparison of what the Bible says happened in Earth Day 1 and what science says in Cosmic Day 1. One of the things you may want, I'm sure all of you go home and research this tonight, but the time, the clock of the universe is not what we call a day. The time of the universe is determined by, don't let this blow your mind, the cosmic background radiation, CBR, which is the radiation that is left over from Big Bang. It's a very determined timing, if you will, the decaying exponential, and we're going to get into that. And that's what, by the method that I use, I'm showing that I use as a cosmic day compared to an Earth day. An Earth day, as you know, was the time that it takes the Earth to revolve on its axis one time. And we're going to talk about that. I want to give some time tonight, if we have the capability or whatever, if you guys want to see if there are any questions or discussions. I've kind of hurried through some of this because I did want to leave some time. So if you have questions, either here in the church or in the those people online listening, I'd be happy to entertain any comments or observations. Next time, again, I will get into Genesis 1 and 2. We'll get pretty deeply into it, and we'll get into cosmic time. To give you an overview, in terms of cosmic background radiation, CBR, I was lucky enough to be at Bell Labs when Bob Wilson and Roger Penzias discovered cosmic background radiation at Bell